Hello, I am Deltarune, and today I am going to talk about Deltarune's Roaring Knight. I woke up this morning, I slept terribly, and I said to myself, you know what would be great use of my day today is to spend all day talking about the Roaring Knight. So I put together a slideshow with 28 hours left before Chapter 5's release to decide who is Deltarune's Roaring Knight. I'm going to do a short chronological analysis of the chapters and the knight's presence through them, and who might be an interesting candidate narratively, essentially. So here's the assumptions. Number one, Toby Fox wanted us to make us think about the Roaring Knight from the very beginning. The Roaring Knight does have identity that is foreshadowed, and the foreshadowing is both intentional and accurate. No, Toby forgot or Toby messed up. And the identity of the Roaring Knight is important to the overall story of Deltarune. The narrative of the base game is heavily tied to the identity of the Roaring Knight. And I think if you go into this with those assumptions in mind, you will reach the same conclusion that I have. I went into this with a very different bias compared to how I left it, which was really surprising to me, but the evidence really piled up and up and up, so we'll get to it. But let's just get started with Chapter 1. Chapter 1, you might think, well, there's not a lot of things about the knight in Chapter 1, but we can extrapolate 4 important details. The Darkners of Chapter 1 all know about the knight. King seems especially smitten with the knight. The knight is the one who creates dark fountains, and the dark fountains create the world itself of the dark world, and we, as Lightners, are directly opposed to the knight when we're playing as the fun gang. Not we as the player, but we as the fun gang are Lightners directly opposed to the knight. So, at the end of Chapter 1, the thought of who is the knight, I assumed would be some sort of Darkner akin to King, part of the Dark World, and they emerged from the Dark World into the world above of the real world, quote-unquote, of Hometown, right? We know that the fountains create the Dark World, and the knight is the one who creates the fountain. So it just seems like some sort of spontaneous genesis, right? Then we get to Chapter 2, and we learn a whole lot more, and we can kind of begin to ask the question, who is the Roaring Knight? We have Queen, who apparently has some sort of history where she was not obsessed with creating dark fountains and the Roaring Knight, and then when the knight appeared and created the fountain of Cyber City, she went crazy and decided that she needed to cover the whole world in darkness. She's very obsessed with Noelle's well-being and thinks that creating a dark world that covers the entire world would make her happy because it's different from her regular home life. And she thinks that the knight is somehow involved. I'm not sure if that's necessarily the text that we're supposed to read there, but maybe. We learn that to create a dark fountain, you need a power of determination. And whatever happened between Spanton and the knight really messed him up. We know that the knight knows about Jevil, and previously we knew that Jevil knew about Queen, so there's some sort of cross-Dark World referencing going on in canon. So, Queen has her big monologue here, where we learn that the knight's title is the Roaring Knight, which is interesting that she calls the knight the Roaring Knight before she knows what the roaring is. But apparently, it's a known title. So the knight creates the world, reaching their hand, forcing its will into the blade, and plunging it into the earth to make a dark world. To do so, the knight needed a power of determination, which is apparently something that Lightners possess, but not Darkners. Then we start to gather, well, maybe the knight's goal in creating dark fountains is to bring joy. Susie says at the end of the chapter, is creating a dark fountain really a bad thing because it creates this dark world which has its history and citizens and people, and it's a fun adventure. Is that a bad thing? It seems that there's some sort of dichotomy between creating a dark world being good and creating fountains being bad, because the fountains is what leads to the roaring. We learned that Rousey has inexplicably the power to travel between dark worlds, but most Darkners can't. They turn to stone. They have to have some sort of purpose. This is not a theory video about Rousey, so I'm going to skip over most of that. But essentially, we know that there's a purpose created for the dark world based on their environment, and Darkners can't exist outside of those. And there is a line in chapter 2 where Noelle says, Des said that she'd take me to a place that was similar to the dark world that was Cyber City. We learned that if you create another dark fountain while you're inside a dark world, you'll bring the roaring, which is bad. We also learned that there is a shared history. It's more explicitly stated here, where King has his discussion with Queen, and they have pet nicknames for each other. So we know that there's some sort of established history that we're not privy to, we don't get to see. Despite the Dark Worlds being recently made, they have some sort of history that existed before we interact with them. So who is the Roaring Knight? When you seal the fountain, you are in the library, you and Susie are standing, and Berdly and Noelle are passed out. And there's an open closet door over in the corner. Queen said that Darkners can't make fountains, so the person who created this fountain had to be some sort of Lightner. And you start to retroactively think, well, someone also had to make the chapter 1 fountain and the storage closet fountain, which is Castletown. So the knight is either someone who was in the library when the fountain was sealed, or someone who was waiting in the library in this closet and also escaped while they were in there, but we never saw them, which is plausible. To begin narrowing down our list of all Lightners ever, we have Gaster's list, which you've probably heard of before. At the Goner Maker sequence, you can input names, and you get special dialogue. So here we have Chris, Susie, Noelle, Toriel, Azriel, Asgore, Sans, Papyrus, Alphys, Undyne, Rudy, Berdly, Caddy, Braddy, Gerson, Jockington, and QC as characters who all appeared in Undertale, or were mentioned as part of Undertale. Caddy, with a Y, or an I rather, not part of Undertale, question mark. Rudy, kind of not part of Undertale, question mark, but does get special dialogue. So, Noelle, not part of Undertale. Susie, not part of Undertale. Chris, not part of Undertale. Obviously there's special placement for Chris, Susie, and Noelle. They have the You Are About to Meet Someone Very, Very Wonderful, where no other characters do. So that kind of places them in a role of greater importance than everyone else. Interestingly, no Darkners are on this list. You would think that Rousey would get a similar treatment. So, from here, I've extrapolated a list of notable Lightner candidates. At the very, very, very top, I have Chris. Then there's a gap, and I have Noelle, Berdly, and Susie. And I have these four at the top because they were the people who were in the library at the time that the Dark Fountain was sealed. Everyone else is kind of an afterthought based on the Gaster list. And I'm going to go through all these candidates based on what we know at the end of Chapter 2, and hopefully this will influence our decision as we go forward, as we just kind of pin our conspiracy board together. So, obviously, we can start with Chris. They have the ninth freak out cliffhanger at the end of chapter 1, and then at the end of chapter 2, they literally make a dark world in front of us. So, that seems like a pretty likely knight candidate, right? At the time of chapter 2's release, pre-chapter 3 and 4 release, everyone pretty much thought that Chris was the knight. They check all the boxes. They had access to the school. It would make sense that they would be the one who created it because of the knife thing at the end of chapter 1. It seems like they made the next Dark World too, and then they make the third Dark World. It's like, wow, well, they make all the fountains. The person who makes the fountains is the knight. It has to be Chris. They're the one who did it, right? But there's other candidates. We have Noelle. She was there. But as you see in the sequence where she joins the party, she's never been in a Dark World. So, or at least never in a battle in a Dark World. She definitely seems confused. Probably not a great candidate. Rudy says she gets scared and freezes up easily, so she's maybe not the knight. She doesn't seem like a strong character who would inflict fear and bravery into King for chapter 1. She doesn't seem like the type of character who would inspire King to rise up and overthrow the other kings and take over the Dark World of chapter 1. She doesn't seem morally evil aligned, which it kind of seems like the knight is. She joins our party at one point, so it kind of implies to us that she wouldn't be the knight. But of course, our leading candidate at this time is Chris, who is our main character, who you would think would be opposed to the knight. So, she's up there certainly, but she's maybe not the strongest candidate. Except for that thing that happens in the Weird Route. She has some sort of power that is lying underneath the surface. Next we have Birdley, and I don't want to talk too much about Birdley. He seems like a good candidate at face value. He works at the library. He could have created the library fountain, except that happens. Which leads us to believe that probably Birdley isn't the knight, because then the rest of the game wouldn't happen, right? Susie, again, she mentions frequently that going into the Dark Worlds and going on adventures and being a hero is cool, and it's better. It seems like her kind of bag. So maybe she's the one creating fountains because she wants to live the life of adventure and heroism that she doesn't get in the real world. Then we get to our less likely candidates, and I say less likely purely because they're not the 4 people who were in the room when the library was sealed. But as we know, there was a large closet, so a large person like Asgore could have fit in there. Asgore's at the top of the next list of Lightners because he was at some point a member of the cops. He was removed from the force. Apparently he was the captain. He probably had too much prevalence in Undertale, but we know that he's a boss monster. Same thing with Toriel. We know that boss monsters retain their strength from Undertale, based on purely this line from Rudy that says she hit him across the room with key lime pie, which you would not extrapolate that most people would be able to do unless they had some sort of strength derived from magic. She works at the school, so she could have created the first fountain. She's a beloved community member, so she could be walking around, going to the library. She wouldn't draw suspicion from Birdley and Noelle. She walked in while they were studying, that kind of thing. Sans, he's a recent member of the community, so that would maybe draw suspicion off of him. And obviously he's got all sorts of stuff going on with his character based on what we know of him from Undertale. But I think he's probably had too much prevalence in Undertale to be a major player in the narrative of Deltarune. Alphys didn't get an Undertale fight, and that might be something that Toby Fox wanted to rectify in this game, which is the only reason why I put Alphys so high here at the end of Chapter 2's candidates. Undyne, we know that she's got a strong moral code, probably would be opposed to creating dark worlds that are dangerous, causing the roaring. And also, she pretty much laughs in your face about the existence of dark worlds, doesn't believe you. And if you take that at face value, then she's probably not the knight. Rudy, previously best known for dying from the alarm clock dialogue. He's a beloved community member? He's sick, though. He's, like, very sick. He coughs a lot. He's got some stuff messed up in his lungs. So, maybe not the strongest knight candidate. He seems to struggle going about on a regular basis through the town. He seems cooped up in the hospital. Probably unlikely to have created the Chapter 2 fountain. Not impossible, though. There's Caddy. Caddy has some sort of shared history with Chris. They studied occult together. She's got a talk sprite, which is kind of important. A lot of characters in the light world don't. So, she's on the Gaster list. She's here. Jockington fans, they're crazy, man. I don't think Jockington has any relevance. Kind of a joke character, kind of like Alphys's inclusion. He's got a talk sprite. He's kind of like an accessory to Caddy. People have discussed before, they think that Caddy and Jockington will be in the dark world and they'll be paired together as like a duo, but again, probably not super relevant to the narrative. We have Caddy with a Y, who is Caddy's older sister. She's part of the Azrael Death Generation. They were in some sort of friend group. Caddy, Bratty, Burger Pants, Azrael, and Des. Caddy's got a sister complex. She's very obsessed with her sister Caddy. She's got a talk sprite. Probably not the most story relevant, again, but she does exist. Same thing with Bratty, except she's got a Caddy complex instead. Again, probably not extremely narratively relevant, not from what we've seen so far. Here's QC, who I thought was a white rabbit in some cool lighting, but apparently directly translates to a purple rabbit, and she runs QC's Diner. She's got maybe shopkeeper power from Undertale, but she's not really a shopkeeper here. She's on the list because she's on the Gaster list, but otherwise I probably wouldn't have included her. Here we have Gerson. For similar reasons as QC, he's on the list, except we know that he's dead in Deltarune. So he probably wouldn't be involved unless you're Jaru and you've created the Oberon Smog theory. There's Alvin, which I put on the list because you would assume that Alvin, who is Gerson's son, might fill a similar role. He's an influential community member because he's the priest of the church. He doesn't have a talk sprite though, which is kind of... He doesn't have a talk sprite though, which kind of eliminates him from the running, basically. On the other hand, there's Carol, who seems like a very powerful member of the community, the mayor, Noelle's mom. We don't really know much about her. In fact, at this point, by the end of Chapter 2, we only know that her first initial is C. She's the mayor. And people assumed that her name was Carol at that point already because of the holiday family theme. But we don't know anything about her at this point. There's Azrael. He is on the Gaster list, but he's not part of the narrative. He's mentioned here and there. Apparently he's away at college, which would give him a plausible cover. But again, if he was spotted, that would probably be brought up at some point. So this would have to be something that was done under the cover of the night. Probably makes it really hard to access the Chapter 2 library fountain. We do know that he is a boss monster that had a lot of prevalence in Undertale. Again, I don't think that he's going to be super narratively relevant. Not high on my list of knight candidates. And then Papyrus. Poor Papyrus. I was so excited to see Papyrus in Chapter 2 after Chapter 1. Papyrus was my favorite Undertale character, and then Papyrus was not there, and probably won't ever be in Deltarune. He's on the list because he's on the Gaster list. He's got special dialogue, but we don't know anything about Papyrus and Deltarune. Probably not going to be relevant. At the very bottom of the list is Des, and Des is missing. We kind of know that already at the end of Chapter 2. There's the spelling bee scene. Noelle collapses. She can't spell December. She talks nostalgically about Des, saying that she'd take her to somewhere like Cyber City. And while they're walking through the hallway, it spells December with the speak and spell typing keys. Most people, I think, prescribe to the theory that the unused dialogue in the game and also this interjection and spam-pin dialogue, these are all Des talking to the player. Some lost somewhere in the depths. She's not available to be doing the things that the knight would do, you would think. So, that being said, there's 2 more candidates, and that's Gaster, who is very mysterious. We think that probably Gaster is the whole reason we're here in the first place. If you don't think that Gaster is running the Goner Maker sequence, I think you're kidding yourself. Gaster seems to exist in some sort of meta layer separated from the world of Deltarune. Perhaps even a world equivalent to, but lower than our own. If you haven't seen Molly Starr's Device Theory, I would highly recommend you take a look at that series because it's really cool. And I think it's probably pretty accurate to the situation that Gaster is in the narrative. We also have Friend, who shows up real briefly. I put some other images here because it says Friend in them, but I don't think Friend's probably relevant. People were freaking out about Friend because who doesn't like a cool Easter egg in the basement of Queen's Mansion? The image _ friend appears. Because of that, we know that image _ friend is related to Gaster because it's named in the same way that other things are in the Gaster layer of the Goner Maker, that kind of thing. So, some sort of tool used by Gaster or exists in the same place as him. Seems to me like some kind of darkener, so he's at the very bottom of the list. Friend is probably gonna get cut. So here's the list of candidates, and I've cut out a bunch to hopefully make some progress as we go into the next chapter to decide who is the Roaring Knight. In Chapter 3, we get this really, really, really big line. Ramb says, "Seems like just yesterday, you and that girl had everyone lined up, Queen on her side, King on your side, Penna and back. So there's 2 people who were playing make-believe with these objects, a girl and Chris. Chris has King, the girl has Queen. There's a lot of implications you would make from this line immediately. And this is at like the very beginning of Chapter 3, right after the first board. There's also something else that happens in Chapter 3 concerning the knight. You see that. And your immediate thought is probably not, oh, well, that seems like a normal thing that most Lightners are capable of doing. So I've cut down the list a lot more. I took Chris off the list because you fight the knight as Chris. They probably can't be the knight. But we know that there's some weird stuff going on with Chris and the knight based on dialogue with Tenna. There's Des, Rudy, Carol, and Noelle at the top because they are the Holiday family, and we would assume that Des and the rest of them all have antlers like the knight does. Of course, the immediate argument is, well, the knight's antlers could be part of a helmet, and the knight doesn't actually have antlers, which I would agree with. it's possible, which is why there exist more people on the list. But I don't think it's as likely as the knight being one of the Holiday family members. So Des is at the top of my list, and the weird stuff going on with the Roaring Knight reminded me of this line from Chapter 2, where Susie is talking about Dragon Blazers 2 and says, it's like when your sister gets cursed. And someone who was infected by the darkness, missing, even the members of the Dark World don't know that she's gone. That kind of seems like maybe that's what's going on with the Knight, right? They're weird. They're really weird. They shapeshift. They've got some sort of darkness powers. Des might fit that to a T, right? And there's a lot of mentions of Des in this chapter. You've probably seen this image before. Tenna says, didn't you all think she was just so cool? And then here's a comparison of Chris and the Knight doing similar poses. So maybe Chris is imitating what the Knight does. That would make an interesting candidate for Des Knight. There's also the Knight holding the bat, and people have all been up and tizzy about the bat and the katana and blah 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 blah. But it looks like a bat, and there's really strong imagery related to Des holding bats, liking sports, especially using a wiffle bat. Next we got Rudy. He's got antlers. There's this weird thing going on with the Knight when they roar, where there's a big ol' eye in its chest, and, well, Rudy's got something going on in his lungs. He coughs up stuff, and it seems like he's really, really sick. Maybe he's got some sort of darkness-related sickness. There's Carol. We don't know much about her. Noelle, she got antlers, but kind of the same disqualifying things as before. Hattie is a girl who could have been Chris's age and played with them as they were growing up. That's pretty much the only reason she's still on the list. There's Susie, which, I mean, it says right here she's a level 3 Dark Knight. And if it wasn't for the end of the chapter where Susie is fighting the Knight directly, I would think that Susie was the Knight, and her motivation to be the Knight was, again, creating fountains to live out a world that was better than her home life itself, where it seems like she lives kind of destitute and a very solitary life. We have Azriel, who does get some mentions here, or so we assume from this Rubik dialogue. Azriel is pictured in the Tenna flashback. The same kind of things that I think disqualify Azriel before still disqualify Azriel. He's away at college, and so him showing back up would be noted for sure. Azriel had a lot of relevance in Undertale and probably would not again take up so much narrative space. For those reasons, I think that Azriel probably is not the Knight. But we don't know anything about Azriel, so you can't say that he isn't. Here we get to Chapter 4, and we learn a lot more about the Knight, just based on interacting with them personality-wise. Susie has her big line at the end of the church sequence where she says, the Knight is someone who goes to church, who knows the mayor, who also has something to do with the cops. So, there's a couple people who that could be. The other big thing is at the end of Chapter 3, we know that the Knight kidnapped Undyne and took Undyne to the bunker. So the Knight is no longer seen as some sort of morally dubious character, but is instead definitely kind of veering towards an evil kind of character. I narrowed down the list even some more. The Holiday family members are still up top. Then we've got Caddy. And then we've got the rest of the Lightners who we don't really know enough about. But there's a lot of stuff that happens in the Light World sequence that I'll talk about real quick. And then when you see who I've omitted from the list as I go through, I hope that you will reach the same conclusion that I did when making this video. First, Asgore, I think, is probably the least likely candidate to be the knight at this point. We see in Chapter 4, there's the prophecy that we believe that Asgore would be the main boss of Chapter 5, but we think that also Asgore is highly involved with the knight in the knight plot, involved with Carol and Chris. Asgore was a member of the police, maybe the police captain before Undyne. Something happened. He got removed from the force. He's still investigating Dessa's disappearance. That's basically the inference that you can make based on all the dialogue that happens. The big reveal is that he's got a black shard, which is the weapon that you get from defeating the knight in Chapter 3. So he's somehow related to the knight. So he's definitely got a strong connection, but I would be very surprised, honestly, if Asgore was the knight. I think Asgore is part of a plot that is working with the knight, whoever it is, but is not the knight directly. Also, does this look like a guy who is not involved, who doesn't know about the code, who's not listening in on what Chris and Susie are doing? Asgore is going to be highly involved, for sure, with whatever is going on in the shelter. Next, I have Carol. Carol Knight, I think, is unlikely. On the other hand, I think Carol is highly involved in the narrative, despite the fact that she was introduced so late. It's obvious to me that Carol is the voice on the phone that's working with Chris. She immediately comes home right after Chris calls and says that Susie has the guitar. They have been talking to the weird phone voice, and people think Chris is talking directly to the knight. But that doesn't make as much sense to me as that Carol is talking to Chris. Carol has a katana on the wall. We know that the knight's sword kind of looks like a katana after it transforms from a bat. She's got antlers. She got big old pointy antlers. They're kind of shaped similarly to the knight's. But I would, again, be surprised if Carol was the knight. I don't think she's the best candidate. I think it's somewhat of a red herring. Something that people also throw out to say there's no way that Carol could be the knight, and I kind of disagree and agree with it, is the fact that Carol takes Noelle into the kitchen, and then you can leave the Noelle house immediately after that and go directly to the church. And so the question is, how did Carol, if Carol is the knight, make it to the church before you? Because the knight is already in the church in Chapter 4. The joke, of course, is that Carol has secret rich person underground tunnels that are faster than walking above ground that go directly to the church. On the other hand, you don't see Rudy leave the church at the beginning of the chapter, but Rudy will beat you to the hospital if you go directly to the hospital from the church. So you don't necessarily need to see someone walking through town to get to a new destination to assume that they have gone there. Especially because you could have gone to the Noelle holiday section first and then gone to Castletown before going to the church. So there's a strong possibility that Carol could be the knight, but it seems more like she's a plotter and mastermind and probably works with the knight rather than is the knight. Next I have Des. We do get direct confirmation. She's got a bat. Des is high up on the list for the same reasons that she's been on the list all along. there's some weird stuff going on with her being trapped in the darkness. She's missing. The night is kind of animalistic. It seems like maybe Des could have been lost in the depths and been corrupted by the darkness and is being piloted around, or maybe has some semblance of what she's doing and is being ordered around by her mother still. Then we have Rudy Knight. If you've seen that, I think that pretty much explains Rudy Knight by itself. I think Rudy is a pretty good candidate, but Rudy is not my number one candidate. And let me show you why. That's right, folks. Noelle is the knight. I know it for a fact. Noelle is the Roaring Knight. The reason is so simple, and everything is laid out for us in Chapter 2. Noelle wants to heal her dad, who is sick, because she can't lose another family member like Des. He's the girl who played with Chris when they were young. She would know all the intricacies of the Dark World lore. She's the one who had Queen on her side, which is why Queen is so attached to her. It's been laid out for us already. And as soon as we had Ram's line in Chapter 3, we could have extrapolated this. Noelle has to be the Roaring Knight. I'm 100% certain of it. And if it's not revealed in Chapter 5, then I'll make an updated video. But I'm quite certain that this is exactly what Toby Fox intended for us to find by this point. I know it's controversial, but it's just the truth. I 100% believe this now, so we'll see what Chapter 5 holds very, very soon, but I hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble, and I hope that you've drawn your own conclusions about who the Roaring Knight is. Thanks for watching.